The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Staff Sergeant James Cooper drove his old pickup truck into his hometown of Pine Valley. After 3 tough tours in Afghanistan, everything looked smaller than he remembered. The familiar buildings seemed to have aged 10 years in the 3 he'd been gone, their paint peeling and signs fading in the harsh mountain weather. Cooper's stomach growled as he passed the Welcome to Pine Valley sign. He hadn't eaten since morning, and the thought of a good meal made him slow down when he spotted Sarah's diner. The red neon sign flickered weakly in the dimming light, but the open sign shone bright and clear. This was the place his father used to bring him every Sunday after church, back when life was simple and the biggest worry was whether they'd have his favorite apple pie in stock. The bell above the door chimed as Cooper pushed it open. The sound brought back memories of his father's deep laugh and the smell of fresh coffee. Inside, the diner looked different from what he remembered. The old jukebox was gone, replaced by a small TV mounted in the corner. The familiar red booths had been reupholstered in blue, and the chrome counter showed more scratches than shine. But the warm smell of cooking food and fresh coffee remained the same. Cooper chose a booth near the back, an old habit from his military days. It gave him a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen door. He sat with his back to the wall, another habit he couldn't shake. His therapist at the VA had told him it was normal, that it would take time to adjust to civilian life. Cooper wasn't sure he wanted to adjust. Those habits had kept him and his men alive. A young waitress approached with a menu, but Cooper politely waved it away. "Just coffee and the meatloaf special, if you still have it," he said. The girl nodded and hurried off, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As Cooper waited for his food, he watched the other customers. An elderly couple shared a slice of pie near the window. A truck driver hunched over a burger at the counter. 2 teenagers giggled over their milkshakes in a corner booth. Normal people living normal lives. Cooper wondered if he would ever feel that normal again. The bell chimed again, and Cooper's attention shifted to the door. Sarah herself emerged from the kitchen, and Cooper felt a smile tugging at his lips. She looked older now, her hair more gray than black, but she moved with the same quick energy he remembered. She was carrying a coffee pot, making her rounds to the regulars, when Cooper noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Something was wrong. Cooper's training kicked in as he scanned the diner more carefully. That's when he noticed 3 men at the counter he hadn't paid attention to before. They wore leather vests with patches he didn't recognize, and they were speaking to Sarah in low, aggressive tones. Sarah's face was pale, but she held her ground, shaking her head at whatever they were saying. Cooper watched as more bikers entered the diner, their heavy boots thumping against the worn linoleum floor. The other customers seemed to shrink in their seats, and the young waitress quickly disappeared into the kitchen. The atmosphere in the diner changed instantly, like the heavy air before a storm. 7 bikers total now. Cooper counted them automatically, noting their positions and sizing them up. Most looked tough but undisciplined. The way they carried themselves told him they were used to intimidating civilians, not facing real resistance. Their leader, a tall man with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, leaned over the counter towards Sarah. "Last chance, old lady," the man said, his voice carrying clearly in the now silent diner. "The price went up since last week. Should paid when it was cheaper." Cooper felt his jaw tighten. He watched Sarah's face, saw the fear she was trying to hide, and remembered how she'd given him free pie the day they heard about his father's heart attack. He remembered how she'd closed the diner to attend the funeral, how she'd hugged him and told him his father was the best man she'd ever known. His coffee sat untouched on the table as Cooper made his decision. Some habits you couldn't shake, and some you shouldn't. Protecting people who couldn't protect themselves was one of those habits. As he stood up slowly, Cooper felt a familiar calm settle over him. The kind of calm that came before every mission, every firefight, every moment when everything was on the line. The bikers hadn't noticed him yet. That was about to change. Snake, as the other bikers called him, grabbed a coffee mug from the counter and smashed it on the floor. The sound made everyone in the diner jump except Cooper, who remained perfectly still, watching. Pieces of white ceramic scattered across the floor like broken ice. "See what happens when you don't cooperate?" Snake said to Sarah, his voice getting louder. "Next time, it won't be just a cup." He ran his fingers along the counter, knocking over sugar containers and napkin holders. His gang members spread out through the diner, making the other customers nervous. Sarah's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed strong. My husband and I built this place 40 years ago, she said. We never paid protection money then, and I'm not starting now. She tried to clean up the broken cup, but one of the bikers kicked the pieces away. Cooper noticed everything from his spot in the back. He saw how Snake kept his weight on his right leg, probably from an old injury. He noticed how two of the bikers kept touching their right jackets, probably hiding weapons. He watched how they moved, like wolves circling their prey, without any real training. These weren't soldiers. They were just bullies with motorcycles. The elderly couple by the window tried to leave quietly. A biker with a red beard stepped in their way. "Nobody leaves," he announced. "Not until our business is finished." The old man held his wife's hand tightly as they sat back down. Snake walked behind the counter, ignoring Sarah's protests. He opened the cash register and started counting the money inside. "Not much here," he said, pocketing the bills. "Business must be bad. Maybe something will happen to make it even worse." He winked at Sarah, making her step back. The truck driver at the counter stood up slowly. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice shaking a little. "She's just trying to run her business." Two bikers immediately grabbed the man's shoulders and pushed him back onto his stool. Snake laughed. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero," he said. "You know what happens to heroes?" He cracked his knuckles loudly. The teenagers in the corner were crying quietly now. Cooper saw the young waitress peeking out from the kitchen, her phone in her hand. Good. She was probably calling the police, but Cooper knew they wouldn't get here in time to stop what was about to happen. Snake picked up a plate of half-eaten food and threw it against the wall. "This is what happens when people don't respect us," he shouted. "We run this town now. Everyone pays. No exceptions." The other bikers started following their leader's example. They knocked over chairs and broke plates. One of them grabbed a bottle of ketchup and sprayed it on the walls. Another pulled down the American flag that had hung by the door since Cooper was a kid. That was when Cooper decided he'd seen enough. He stood up quietly, his chair making no sound on the floor. Years of combat training had taught him how to move silently. He took off his jacket slowly, folding it neatly and placing it on the booth. Underneath, his t-shirt showed arms strong from years of military service. Sarah saw him first. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head slightly, trying to warn him to stay back. But Cooper had made his decision. He'd spent 3 tours protecting people from bullies with bigger guns than these. He wasn't going to stop now. Snake was still behind the counter, dumping out containers of coffee and throwing cups on the floor. He hadn't noticed Cooper yet. The other bikers were too busy causing destruction to see the danger approaching. Cooper took a deep breath, just like he used to before every mission. He noted the positions of all 7 men. He saw the exits, the possible weapons, the civilians he needed to protect. In his mind, the diner became a battlefield, and he was back in familiar territory. The young waitress was still watching from the kitchen. Cooper caught her eye and held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. She understood and ducked back inside. He wanted her safe when things started happening. Snake grabbed Sarah's arm, making her cry out in pain. "Maybe we should take a look in the back," he said, pulling her toward the kitchen. "See what other money you're hiding." Cooper stepped into the center of the diner. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but carried through the whole room. The kind of voice that had commanded men in battle, that had given orders under gunfire. "Let her go," he said. "Now." The diner went completely silent. All eyes turned to Cooper. Snake's face twisted into an ugly smile as he saw what looked like an easy target. He had no idea he was about to have the worst day of his life. Snake looked at Cooper like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The diner remained dead quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fans. Everyone watched as Cooper took another step forward, his boots silent on the littered floor. "What did you say?" Snake asked, still gripping Sarah's arm. His gang members stopped their destruction to watch the scene unfold. They weren't used to anyone standing up to them, especially not one man alone. Cooper's face stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp and focused. They were the eyes of someone who had seen real combat, who had made split-second decisions that meant life or death. "I said, let her go," he repeated, his voice still quiet but filled with authority. "This is your only warning." One of the bikers, a tall man with a skull tattoo on his neck, laughed nervously. "Hey Snake, this guy thinks he's some kind of hero." But his laughter died when Cooper turned those combat-hardened eyes toward him. Snake pushed Sarah aside roughly. She stumbled but caught herself on the counter. "Listen, friend," Snake said, trying to sound reasonable while his hand slowly moved toward his jacket. "This isn't your business. Walk away now, and we'll forget you tried to play tough guy." Cooper took in everything at once, just like he'd been trained. He saw how Snake's right hand was reaching for something in his vest. He noticed two bikers trying to move behind him. He spotted the red-bearded one blocking the main door. In his mind, he was already planning 3 moves ahead. "I'm only going to explain this once," Cooper said, speaking clearly so everyone could hear. "You're going to leave this diner. You're going to leave Sarah and her business alone, and you're going to do it now." "Oh yeah," Snake sneered, taking a step closer. "And who's going to make us? You." He looked Cooper up and down, noticing his military bearing but choosing to ignore the warning signs. "What are you, some kind of soldier boy?" "Staff Sergeant James Cooper," he answered calmly. "Third tour, Afghanistan. Special Forces." He didn't say it as a boast, just as a fact. Some of the younger bikers shifted uncomfortably, but Snake wasn't backing down. "Well, Sergeant," Snake mocked, spreading his arms wide. "This isn't Afghanistan. This is my town now, and in my town, everyone pays their respects." He cracked his neck, trying to look intimidating. "7 of us, 1 of you, those aren't good odds, soldier boy." Cooper almost smiled. "You're right," he said softly. 7 against 1 isn't fair." He paused, looking directly into Snake's eyes. "You should have brought more men." The elderly couple in the corner held hands tightly. The truck driver watched with wide eyes. Even the teenagers had stopped crying, sensing something big was about to happen. Sarah stood behind the counter, worried for Cooper, but seeing something in him that gave her hope. Snake's face turned red with anger. No one had ever talked to him like this, especially not in front of his crew. "Last chance," he growled. "Walk away, or we'll carry you out in pieces." Cooper didn't move. His voice, when he spoke again, carried the weight of someone who had faced much worse than angry bikers. "In about 10 seconds, you're going to make a choice," he said. "You can walk out that door on your own, or I'll show you exactly what Special Forces training looks like up close." 2 of the younger bikers actually took a step back. They could sense what their leader couldn't, that they weren't dealing with an ordinary man. Cooper stood relaxed but ready, his stance that of a trained fighter who knew exactly what he was capable of. "You're really starting to piss me off," Snake snarled, his hand now clearly gripping something under his vest. Cooper knew it was probably a knife. These types always carried knives. The ceiling fans kept turning. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Sarah held her breath. Cooper counted down in his head, giving them their last chance to make the right choice. 5 seconds, Cooper warned. His muscles tensed slightly, ready for what was coming. He knew Snake's type too well. They always chose the hard way. Snake's face twisted into an ugly grin as he pulled out a switchblade. "Get him," he ordered his men. Cooper sighed quietly. They had made their choice. Now they would learn why you don't mess with a Special Forces soldier. Snake lunged forward with his knife, but Cooper was already moving. Years of combat training took over as he stepped sideways, grabbing Snake's wrist and turning the man's momentum against him. The knife clattered to the floor as Snake crashed into a table, sending coffee cups flying. 2 bikers rushed Cooper from different directions. He'd been expecting this. Cooper dropped low, sweeping the legs out from under the first attacker while simultaneously blocking a punch from the second. The first biker hit the floor hard, while the second stumbled backward, surprised by Cooper's speed. "Get him!" Snake shouted from where he'd fallen. "Don't let him near the door." The red-bearded biker by the door pulled out brass knuckles, grinning as he approached. Cooper knew he had to control the space. He grabbed a nearby chair and pushed it into the man's path, forcing him to stop. In that split second, Cooper closed the distance and struck 3 precise hits: ribs, solar plexus, throat. The big man dropped his brass knuckles and fell to his knees, gasping for air. Sarah watched in amazement as Cooper moved with controlled precision. He wasn't fighting wild like a street brawler. Every movement had purpose, every step calculated. This was what real military training looked like. The biker with the skull tattoo swung a chain, trying to catch Cooper off guard. Cooper caught the chain around his forearm, ignoring the sting, and yanked hard. The man flew forward, right into Cooper's waiting elbow. The biker dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the ground. "He's just one guy," Snake screamed, getting back to his feet. "Take him down." The remaining 3 bikers circled Cooper, trying to box him in. Cooper stayed calm, keeping his breathing steady, just like he'd learned in combat training. The first one rushed in, throwing wild punches. Cooper blocked 2 hits before landing a precise strike to the man's jaw, following up with a knee to the stomach that left him curled up on the floor. The last 2 bikers attacked together, one grabbing for Cooper's legs while the other aimed a punch at his head. Cooper jumped back from the leg grab and caught the punch, using the attacker's arm as leverage to throw him into his partner. Both men crashed into the counter, sending sugar dispensers rolling across the floor. Snake had retrieved his knife and was coming at Cooper again, rage in his eyes. "You're dead, soldier boy," he snarled, slashing wildly. Cooper moved like water, dodging each swing while backing up. To the amazed customers watching, it looked like a deadly dance. When Snake overextended on a thrust, Cooper made his move. He trapped Snake's knife hand, twisted sharply, and disarmed him in one smooth motion. Before Snake could react, Cooper had him face down on a table, arm locked behind his back. "The difference between us," Cooper said quietly, increasing pressure on Snake's arm until he dropped the knife, "is that I was trained to fight real enemies. Men with guns and bombs who wanted to kill me and my friends. You're just a bully who picks on old ladies." The other bikers who were still conscious stayed down, watching their leader being handled like a child. The elderly couple held each other, amazed at what they'd seen. The truck driver stood up, ready to help if needed, but Cooper clearly had everything under control. Sarah had called the police on the diner's landline during the fight. Now everyone could hear sirens approaching. Cooper kept Snake pinned, using just enough pressure to keep him from moving without causing serious injury. "Here's what's going to happen," Cooper told Snake, his voice still calm despite having just fought 7 men. "The police are coming. You're going to be arrested. And when you get out, you're going to remember what happened here. Every time you think about causing trouble in this town, you're going to remember how one soldier ruined your day." The diner was a mess of broken dishes and overturned furniture, but amazingly, Cooper had managed to minimize the damage during the fight. More importantly, no civilians had been hurt. He protected the space just like he protected villages in Afghanistan, using his skills to control the situation without excessive force. As the police cars pulled up outside, their lights flashing through the windows, Cooper heard Sarah's quiet voice behind him. "Thank you, James," she said, using his first name just like she had when he was a kid. "Your father would be proud." Cooper kept his hold on Snake, but felt something settle in his chest at her words. Maybe this was why he'd come home, not just to remember the past, but to protect its future. Red and blue lights flashed through the diner's windows as 3 police cars parked outside. Cooper maintained his hold on Snake until the first officers entered, their hands on their weapons as they assessed the scene. The sight that greeted them was like something from an action movie. 7 bikers scattered across the floor, overturned furniture, and one calm man in control of it all. "Evening, officers," Cooper said quietly, still holding Snake firmly but carefully. "Sorry about the mess." Deputy Maria Martinez was the first through the door, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. She was a former Marine herself, and she recognized the controlled way Cooper held the situation. "Everyone okay in here?" she asked, holstering her weapon when she saw there was no immediate threat. Sarah stepped forward from behind the counter. "We're all fine, thanks to him," she said, pointing to Cooper. "These men were trying to extort money from me. They've been threatening all the businesses in town." 2 more officers came in and began handcuffing the bikers who were still conscious. Snake struggled briefly as Cooper handed him over to Deputy Martinez, but one firm twist of his arm made him reconsider. The red-bearded biker was still having trouble breathing from Cooper's strikes, so Martinez called for an ambulance, just to be safe. "I need statements from everyone," Martinez announced to the diner's customers. The elderly couple nodded shakily, still holding hands. The truck driver stood straighter, ready to tell what he'd seen. The teenagers in the corner had their phones out, having recorded parts of the incident. Cooper sat at the counter while Martinez took his statement. She noticed his military bearing immediately. "Army?" she asked, pulling out her notebook. "Special Forces," Cooper replied. "3 tours in Afghanistan." Martinez nodded with respect. Marines myself. 2 tours in Iraq. She wrote down the details as Cooper explained everything that had happened, from the initial threats to the final confrontation. You showed impressive restraint, she noted. No serious injuries, minimal property damage. Tried to keep it clean, Cooper said simply. Didn't want to make more work for Sarah. He looked around at the scattered sugar packets and broken dishes, though I guess I didn't do a great job with that. Sarah was already sweeping up broken glass, refusing to let the incident shut down her diner. Don't you worry about this, James Cooper, she said firmly. This mess can be cleaned up. Having my diner taken over by criminals, that would have been worse. The other officers were searching the bikers as they handcuffed them. They found more weapons, brass knuckles, chains, and several knives. More importantly, they found phones with messages about their extortion racket and lists of businesses they'd been targeting. This is bigger than just your diner, Sarah, Martinez said, looking through one of the phones. These guys are part of a larger operation we've been tracking. They've been causing trouble all across the county. The paramedics arrived to check on the injured bikers. None of them needed serious medical attention. Cooper had been careful to use just enough force to subdue them without causing lasting damage. The red-bearded biker's breathing had returned to normal, though his ego was still bruised. As the police led the handcuffed bikers out to their cars, local news vans began pulling up outside. The teenagers' videos had already made it to social media, and the story was spreading fast. Cooper stayed in his seat at the counter, not interested in the attention. You'll need to come down to the station to give a formal statement, Martinez told him, but it can wait until tomorrow. Clearly, this was self-defense and defense of others. She handed him her card. Come by in the morning, around 10. Cooper nodded, then turned to Sarah. Let me help you clean up before I go. Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. Your father used to say that sometimes good men have to stand up to keep bad men in check. He'd be so proud of you, James. Martinez watched as other customers pitched in to help clean up. The elderly couple started picking up broken dishes. The truck driver righted overturned tables. Even the teenagers put their phones away and began sweeping. In less than an hour, a community had come together to erase the signs of violence. You know, Martinez said to Cooper as she prepared to leave, we could use someone with your skills around here. The department's been looking for a good training officer. Cooper smiled slightly but didn't answer. Right now, he just wanted to help clean up the diner where his father had taught him about doing what was right, no matter how hard it might be. The next morning, Cooper walked into the Pine Valley Police Station exactly at 10 o'clock. The place was buzzing with activity. Officers moved quickly between desks, carrying files and talking in serious voices. Something big was happening. Deputy Martinez spotted him and waved him over to her desk. She had dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she'd worked through the night. 3 empty coffee cups sat next to her computer. Those phones we took from the bikers last night, she said as Cooper sat down. They broke this case wide open. We've been trying to catch these guys for months, but they were always careful, until now. She turned her computer screen so Cooper could see it. On it was a map of 3 counties, with red dots marking different locations. Each dot is a business they've been threatening, she explained. Restaurants, shops, gas stations, anyone who looked like an easy target. Cooper studied the map carefully, his military training kicking in as he spotted the pattern. They're working their way through small towns, he said. Places where the police response might be slower. Martinez nodded. Exactly. And it's not just that gang from last night. They're part of a bigger organization. The messages on their phones connect them to at least 30 other criminals working in the area. She pulled out a thick file and opened it. Inside were photos of tough-looking men on motorcycles, security camera shots of vandalized stores, and reports of threats and violence. They call themselves the Iron Legion, she said. They've been growing stronger for the past year. Cooper picked up one of the photos. It showed Snake talking to a larger man in an expensive leather jacket. Who's this? He asked. Marcus the General Watson, Martinez replied. Ex-military himself, but he was kicked out for bad conduct. Now he runs the whole operation. We think he's using his military experience to organize these groups like combat units. Just then, Chief Brooks walked over to Martinez's desk. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. The FBI just called, he said. They're sending a task force. This is bigger than we thought. The Iron Legion has connections in 5 states. He turned to Cooper and held out his hand. James Cooper, I knew your father. He was a good man. They shook hands. Deputy Martinez told me about how you handled those thugs last night. Clean, professional work. Cooper nodded his thanks, but his mind was on the map. Have you noticed they're avoiding certain areas? He asked, pointing to empty spaces between the red dots. Martinez leaned forward, interested. What do you mean? These towns here, and here, Cooper pointed. No reported incidents. Why? Chief Brooks looked closer at the map. Those towns all have active VFW posts, he said slowly. Veterans of foreign wars. They run community watch programs. And they're harder targets. Cooper finished. The Legion avoids places where they might face real resistance. Martinez quickly typed something into her computer. You're right, she said after a moment. And look at this, in towns where veterans have organized neighborhood watches, the Legion hasn't been able to establish a foothold. Chief Brooks scratched his chin thoughtfully. We've got a lot of veterans in Pine Valley. If we could organize them. It's not just about fighting. Cooper interrupted. These businesses need protection, but they'd also need to know they're not alone. The Legion works by isolating people, making them feel helpless. Martinez pulled up another file on her computer. There's something else you should see, she said. Remember the teenagers' videos from last night? They've gone viral. People are starting to speak up about the Legion all over social media. Other business owners are coming forward with their stories. Cooper watched as she showed him post after post. People sharing their experiences with the Legion, offering support to each other, talking about standing up to the criminals. His actions at the diner had started something. Chief Brooks put a hand on Cooper's shoulder. We could use your help with this, he said. Your military experience, your training, but more than that, you've shown people that standing up to these bullies is possible. Cooper looked at the map again, thinking about Sarah's diner, about his father, about all the small business owners being terrorized by the Legion. He remembered how it felt in Afghanistan, protecting communities from people who tried to rule through fear. The Legion thinks small towns are easy targets, he said quietly. Maybe it's time we show them how wrong they are. Martinez smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Now, let me show you what else we found on those phones. The Pine Valley VFW hall hadn't been this full in years. Every chair was taken, and people stood along the walls, shoulder to shoulder. Cooper stood at the front of the room beside Deputy Martinez, looking out at the crowd. Business owners sat next to veterans, teenagers next to elderly couples. Sarah from the diner was there too, sitting in the front row. The Iron Legion thinks we're weak because we're a small town, Cooper said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. But being small doesn't mean being helpless. Being a community means being strong together. Martinez stepped forward with a stack of papers. We've identified 30 businesses in Pine Valley that have been threatened by the Legion, she said. Thanks to those phones we got from the arrest at Sarah's diner, we know their usual tactics. Cooper pointed to a map on the wall, larger than the one from the police station. They target isolated businesses first, he explained. Places that stay open late, places with fewer customers. They start with threats, then move to vandalism, and finally violence. An older man in a Vietnam veteran's cap stood up. My name's Bill Thompson. I own the hardware store on Oak Street. They broke my windows last week when I refused to pay. Insurance won't cover it because they say I need better security. Other business owners started sharing similar stories. A gas station owner who found his pumps damaged, a restaurant owner who had her tires slashed, a convenience store clerk who quit after being threatened. The Legion had been slowly tightening their grip on the town. That stops now, Cooper said firmly. We're going to set up a community watch program, but not like anything they've seen before. We've got 30 veterans in this room with military and police experience. We're going to put that training to use. Martinez handed out the papers she was holding. These are patrol schedules and emergency contact numbers. We're dividing the town into sectors. Each sector will have a team leader with combat experience and communication equipment. A younger veteran raised his hand. Jack Chen, former Army Rangers. I've got security cameras I never installed. We could set up a monitoring system, link it to our phones. More people started offering help. A retired communications officer volunteered to set up a secure radio network. A former military police officer offered to train business owners in basic security procedures. Sarah offered to make the diner a safe haven where people could go if they felt threatened. Cooper watched as the community came together, sharing resources and ideas. This was what he'd missed in Afghanistan, not the fighting, but the feeling of protecting people, of helping them protect themselves. The Legion's whole operation depends on fear, he continued. They want each business owner to feel alone. Look around this room. You're not alone. None of you are alone anymore. Bill Thompson stood up again. My hardware store has security cameras and a back room we can use as a coordination center. It's centrally located. We can make it our headquarters. An elderly woman who owned a craft shop spoke next. I can keep watch during the day. These old eyes still see everything that happens on Main Street. One by one, people volunteered what they could. A tech-savvy teenager offered to create a secure messaging app for the watch groups. A former combat medic said she put together emergency kits for each patrol. Even people without military experience found ways to help. Cooper and Martinez stayed after the meeting, working with the volunteers to organize the patrol schedules. They made sure every sector had a mix of veterans and civilians, experienced people working with those willing to learn. This is more than just protecting businesses, Cooper told Martinez as they watched people leaving the hall, talking and exchanging phone numbers. We're rebuilding the community my father used to talk about, where people looked out for each other. Sarah came up to them, her eyes bright with determination. The Legion thought they could scare us because we're just a small town, she said. But they forgot something important. In a small town, everybody knows everybody. We take care of our own. Cooper nodded, feeling more at home than he had since returning from Afghanistan. The Iron Legion had wanted to rule through fear. Instead, they had given Pine Valley a reason to become stronger. The war against them wouldn't be won with fists or weapons, but with a community standing together, refusing to be intimidated. As the last people left the hall, Cooper looked at the map again. The Legion was about to learn a hard lesson. Sometimes the smallest towns have the biggest hearts, and the strongest warriors are those who fight to protect their home. 2 weeks had passed since the meeting at the VFW Hall. Cooper sat at his usual spot in Sarah's diner, drinking coffee and watching the early morning light spread across Main Street. The diner looked better than ever. New paint on the walls, fixed-up booths, and a fresh American flag hanging proudly by the door. His phone buzzed with updates from the Community Watch app. The night patrol reported all sectors quiet. Bill Thompson's hardware store cameras showed nothing unusual. The Legion hadn't been seen in Pine Valley since the night at the diner, but nobody was letting their guard down. Deputy Martinez walked in and sat next to Cooper. She looked tired but satisfied. Just got word from the FBI task force, she said quietly. They're moving in on the Legion's headquarters today. The evidence from those phones, plus everything our community patrols gathered. It was enough for search warrants. Cooper nodded, thinking about how much had changed in 2 weeks. The Legion had made a mistake when they targeted Sarah's diner. They thought they were just bullying another small-town business. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant, a community that refused to be victimized. How many arrests so far? He asked. 28 Legion members in 3 counties, Martinez replied. Snake and his crew gave up their bosses to get lighter sentences. The whole operation is falling apart. She smiled. Turns out the general wasn't so tough once his intimidation tactics stopped working. Sarah brought over fresh coffee and a plate of eggs. On the house, she said. For both of you. The diner was filling up with the morning crowd, workers getting breakfast, veterans from the night patrol coming off duty, business owners starting their day. The Community Watch program is spreading, Martinez continued. 3 other towns have copied our system. They're organizing their own patrols, setting up their own networks. The Legion's losing territory faster than they can handle. Cooper watched as Bill Thompson came in with Jack Chen, the former Army Ranger. They were talking about upgrading the security camera system, making it even better. The teenage tech whiz who created their app sat in a corner booth, teaching some older business owners how to use new security features. Chief Brooks wants to make it official, Martinez said. He's proposing a permanent community safety program, with you as the head trainer. Teaching self-defense, organizing patrols, helping other towns set up their own systems. Cooper thought about it. He'd been offered jobs before, security consulting, private military work, positions that would have paid better. But this was different. This was about something his father had always believed in, that a community was only as strong as its willingness to stand together. The door chimed as more people came in. The elderly couple who had been there that first night waved to Cooper. The truck driver who tried to stand up to Snake was teaching his teenage son about the patrol routes. The craft shop owner who watched Main Street was sharing pictures of suspicious vehicles with other business owners. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah said, refilling their coffee cups. "It's not just about stopping the Legion anymore. People are looking out for each other in ways they haven't in years." Mrs. Johnson's craft shop was short on rent last week. 3 other businesses pitched in to help. The hardware store needed repairs. 20 people showed up to work. Cooper smiled, remembering his father's words about community. This was what he'd been looking for since coming home from Afghanistan. Not just a place to live, but a purpose. A way to use his skills to protect people, to teach them to protect themselves. "I'll take the job," he told Martinez. "But I want to expand the training. Not just self-defense, but community organization. How to spot threats, how to work together, how to build something stronger than any criminal gang." Martinez grinned. "Already got the paperwork ready," she said, pulling out a folder. "Chief Brooks figured you'd say yes." As Cooper looked around the diner, at the people he helped, at the community that had come together, at the town that had found its strength, he felt truly at peace for the first time since coming home. The Iron Legion had wanted to rule through fear, but they had accidentally created something powerful instead, a community that refused to be afraid. Sarah put a piece of apple pie in front of him, his father's favorite. "Welcome home, James," she said softly. "For real this time." Cooper took a bite of the pie, tasting memories and hope and future all mixed together. The war he'd fought overseas was over. A different kind of battle had been won here at home, and this victory, built on community rather than combat, felt more complete than any he'd known before.